Welcome to the official podcast of PHP Architect. Join us to listen to the latest news and tech talk from our conferences, the magazine, and wider PHP community.
You're listening to the PHP podcast for PHP Architect magazine. This is for February 2022, volume 21, issue 2. Parallelize Your Code.
See, that's why I chose a name for this magazine.
I hate you so much. I am your host, Eric, and with me is John Condon.
I knew when we created that, I'm like, he's going to stumble over that time and time again as we're recording.
It's not a word. Trust me, I know not words. My handle's not a word.
It's still fun.
It is.
It's a word now. Is a word, isn't it? It's got to be a word.
I mean, you say it enough, it becomes a word. That's like in, Guardians of the Galaxy, all words are made up.
That's true. Definitely true.
All right, let's go ahead and jump right into this. First feature article from Gabriel Zerbib. I hope I pronounced that correctly.
That's how I would have said it.
Zerbib? Okay, you all heard that. I'm not the only one that fumbled that one. Introduction to Diagram as Code. This was very cool. I'm not a big documenter, and I know we all should document things better. There was like this big back and forth of whether or not you should have documentation in your code as code comments, and no, the code should be able to explain itself. You should document stuff outside your code in the form of readmes or whatever you do. And I get all that. And I like documentation, especially good documentation when you have it. That's one of the driving forces behind the Laravel framework, was their documentation was always so solid. But this adds a nice little layer to it. This allows you to create graphics. That's not the word. Graphics? Not really graphics. I don't know. What would you call these?
Images. Basically,
Images.
It comes down to taking text and turning it into images. I like that he gave lots of different methods of doing this, because I've used Plant UML a few times, and like you, I'm not great at it. Served the purpose I needed at the time. I was trying to make sure I had my use cases or the way information flowed between a couple of systems working, but keeping it up to date is a whole other thing, right? But having it in your code base is really nice. Anyone can go look at it. I think if we had more of them and people reference them more often, it'd be easier to keep up to date versus a one-off thing. Just like unit testing, right? You need buy-off from the entire team. Everybody needs to contribute. Otherwise, it dies off quickly. I think the same holds true for documentation / these diagrams. If everyone kept them up to date and participated in making them, we would all be much more successful.
The fact that it becomes part of your repo. As the diagrams are updated, those commits are captured, and you can kind of see who made changes. If something's added to a diagram, you can kind of go in and say, okay, who added this and why? I really like that concept.
Seeing how things change over time is always nice as well. Yeah, great article. Lots of good information and different ways to diagram things.
Yeah, thanks, Gabriel. We have another feature article this month called Teaching Through Code Review from Derek Binkley.
This is another one of those things where I learn more from good code reviews than I do reading on my own, because I'm getting somebody else's perception, somebody else's ideas through using my code as an example, right? Oh, you could have done this, or you should do that. And it's like, really, why? And then they can give me more of an example of why, can articulate it better than I did in my code to begin with. So to me, code review is a huge form of teaching.
I love the way he doesn't brush over the pains of code review as well. He talks about reviewer fatigue and the whole looks good to me syndrome, which I know I'm guilty of. After reviewing enough code, it's like, yeah, no, I don't see anything obviously wrong, and the tests are passing, so good, check mark.
Yeah, exactly. That's a hard one. I strive for keeping pull requests very small to make code review easier, but I've screwed that up completely in the past too, having a huge feature that I'm like, well, if I break this up into these 4 or 5 pull requests, the code review will be much simpler, but I've then broken it in that case as well. Nope, that wasn't easier at all.
Yeah, it's always that weird balance, right? It's like you want to get a lot of work done, and you want to get it committed, and then you do that commit and you see all the changes you've made. It's like, wow, that's a big code review. But like you said, sometimes it's like you don't want to go in there and start breaking it out into different PRs because things are dependent on other things, and you're worried about breaking stuff, and you've already spent so much time creating it. So, yeah, I know. I get it.
All right, moving on. Ken Marks is continuing his How to Hack Your Home with the Raspberry Pi series. And now we're getting into installing the lamp stack onto the Pi. And I love the fact that we're doing this. I'm learning so much about a Pi in general and how to get up and running with it. And the fact that OSMH, or Open Sourcing Mental Health, is partnering with us to give away Raspberry Pis to our listeners and readers of the magazine is great. As of the time we're recording this, we are giving away our first one tonight. So if you're listening to us, sorry you missed out on that one, but please check out our Twitter feed, our Facebook posts. We will be giving away at least 3 or 4 of these over the next few months. So go check that out and listen to PHP Ugly for February 24th. Figure out who got the first one.
I'm having a hard time pumping Ken Marks up anymore because he very explicitly used nano in his examples and didn't use them. So I'm having problems with his credibility now.
I agree.
John, you've been living a lie. You've been living the async lie.
I have been?
Async, yeah. Going with that. You're the only other person in the room with me right now. Async is a Lie by Chris Tankersley, which is very misleading title, I feel, but let's talk about it.
Why is it misleading?
He doesn't really say async is a lie. He just kind of I think what he's really saying is a lot of people's comprehension of async and what async is and what is actually async might not be correct. But that seemed like that would have been a really long title. So
that's true.
So it's not necessarily a lie. It's about it.
Is a lie in the sense that if you follow a stack trace, you very rarely have things working in parallel. The same holds true for JavaScript, where you really think everything is asynchronous, but it's really not. Everything follows a very predictable path, and you just need to know how things are wired together to know what that path is. Sure, sometimes you have events that happen that kind of change, but all of that code still happens in a stack in a very predictable manner. So I think that's where he was going with that. We don't really get into multi-threaded processing in PHP.
I had the pleasure of doing the editorial for this month, and this was one of the articles that kind of inspired me to talk about how PHP is really a battle-tested sort of solution. And I mentioned in the editorial about how there for a while, especially back in the early 2000s, that was the big march, right? The next PHP killer. This is going to kill PHP. This is going to kill PHP. And PHP always managed to not only stay relevant and ahead, but adapt. And I think the async world is kind of with that. So we as PHP developers, which is not async by nature, started coming up with solutions to work around asyncs and how we use queues and stuff like that. And then we started building components and other frameworks that gave more of that async kind of behavior with React, PHP, Swool, and a few others. And Chris talks about a lot of these. I feel like I don't take advantage of those enough. Like I really want to do more of this sort of coding, but maybe I'm just too old school. My mind doesn't think that way either. I can't think of good use cases.
That's part of it, but there's also the fact that we deal mostly with a web request response thing, and it's a very short-lived process. You get a request, you handle it, and you spit out a response. So while there are times where you need that async feel, that's when we start introducing queues and doing other work behind the scenes. But for the most part, we really don't need it in the PHP world. Eric Mann in this month's Security Corner has us getting started with cybersecurity and does a great job of just putting it out there. If you want to get into the world of cybersecurity, here are things that you should be thinking about. Not necessarily cybersecurity specifically related, but how to get into the right mindset of somebody in cybersecurity. And realistically, we should be in this mindset all the time as developers, not just if you want to get into the world of cybersecurity. But all in all, a great read and lots of things to think about.
Good point, John. We'll move on to the workshop and Joe Ferguson. Last month, Joe went to a back to basics and did a whole Apache mod PHP install. This month he levels it up a little bit. We're still running Apache here, but he's now moved over to PHP FPM. And this gives you a few benefits that Joe talks about here. The biggest benefit that I see personally is it allows you to have different versions of PHP for different sites on the same machine. So I've always been a fan of hosting multiple websites on one machine because, I mean, their computers are fast, right? They can handle it. But back in the day when you had Apache and mod PHP, whatever version of PHP you're running on that machine was the version of PHP all the websites were running. But with PHP FPM, you can now start to say, okay, this site runs on 7.2, this configuration runs on 8.0. It's nice. And
it also helps to relieve the bloat of Apache, right? Because with mod PHP, the entire process is within Apache. So the entire memory footprint is taken up within that, where PHP FPM kind of offloads it into a separate worker pool of PHP processes. Apache just communicates with them, and Apache's not killing your machine as often.
Moving on to Community Corner, I have my interview with the other PHP 8.1 release manager, Ben Ramusi. I don't know. Ben, I just call him Ben.
Whatever his name is, right? That guy.
Ramsey sat down and I had to force some answers out of him, but I got answers from him. So if you don't know Ben Ramsey, he's been in the PHP community for a long time. He's done a lot. He spearheaded a bunch of user groups. So he's got the stories. So check out the article.
Also maintains a very popular open source package that most of us use. The UUID package, right?
Yep. That's only one of many. He has a few, but yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Ben, for all you do for the community, no matter what Eric says. Oscar Morita in this month's PHP Puzzles brings us finding integer factors. And I got to tell you, looking forward to March's issue, there's an article coming up, Learning How to Learn. I recommend everybody just take time to do these puzzles. It's a great learning experience, and read next month's article about learning how to learn to know more about what I'm talking about. But anyway, back to the puzzle. I love the way Oscar takes these little math puzzles and shows us in code how to solve them. First he challenges us to do it ourselves, and then gives us a couple of different ways of tackling such a problem.
Yeah. Oscar really has embraced this PHP puzzles article. I'm so happy how into it he is. They're fun. I think when we start meeting again for San Diego PHP user groups, or any user group, I'm going to just throw this out there, any user group. If you want something fun to do between meetups, grab a copy of PHP Architect, see what Oscar has as a puzzle, and then let everybody kind of work on that. And next time everybody gets together, kind of go through the solution. I think that would be fun. Every time I read PHP puzzle, I'm like, this would be fun, like as a group thing, and just have it, see what everybody comes back with.
That's what Orlando PHP did. If they didn't have a specific speaker, they didn't get it from the magazine, although they should have, but it wasn't in there at that time. But they would do a code kata and kind of work through it as a group. But I like your idea of, between meetups, people come up with their own answers, and then almost like a show and tell. Take the first 10 or 15 minutes, let people, here's how I solved it. How'd you do it?
Edward Bernard in this month's DDD Alley brings us When You Know the Pattern. I got to say, one thing I really enjoy about Ed's articles, in the lessons he's kind of giving you in his articles, they all come from real world experiences that he's been through. And it's always nice. Like the application he's talking about in this article is the same one I've been following him on for like the last year and a half. It's like, oh yeah, I know what he's talking about, the application he's talking about.
Oh really? I did not know that. Is he talking about it on Twitter?
No, it's always in his articles. So it wasn't always the DDD article, but it's always that same application that he has.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I thought you meant outside the magazine.
And finally, Beth Tucker-Long brings us Every Which Way But Loose, where she discusses kind of what we talked about earlier. PHP has been around for a long time. It's battle tested. It's going through changes. And all those changes haven't always been easy. those changes have sometimes left some legacy stuff behind. And she kind of talks about this and how the community deals with it and how it handles it, and some of the challenges that have been out there. It's a good read. It's just nice to know that PHP is not a new language, and that's good for us, right? This PHP has been around and will be around for a very long time, and it's going to get to continue to change. We always want to make sure we're bringing in new people so that we stay current and we stay relative.
And have a very strong community in the end.
Yep, that's what it's about. That's really that's what keeps me so connected to PHP is the community. That and it's how I make a living. But community first. Community first.
I like the way you think.
And that'll do it for this month's edition of PHP Podcast for February 2022. Keep listening.
Keep coding. And keep reading.
This has been PHP Podcast, the official podcast of PHP Architect, the industry's leading tech magazine and publisher, focused on PHP and web development. Subscribe today at phparch.com to see what the leaders in the community and industry are talking about.